You gotta be a special brand of stupid to vote for Eric Adams in 2025. But like the cream of wheat man finna be a one-term mayor. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. New York Mayor Eric Adams has announced a series of budget cuts to deal with the migrant crisis here in New York City.
Now to the budget cuts announced today by Mayor Adams.
He says 5% cuts across all agencies are necessary, and that includes sanitation, education, and public safety. Once the cuts are implemented, the NYPD will have the fewest officers it has had since the 90s. CBS 2's Ali Bauman explains what these cuts mean for you.
Where you going? You're supposed to be going that way home.
Lizette Orsini knows everyone at the Astoria houses. She's lived here for 3 decades. But since last year, her neighborhood has seen a rise in almost every major crime. And quality of life, she says, is suffering.
Like in the buildings, we sometimes can't even go inside the buildings because there's people there just sleeping there. So it's like kind of hard in every way.
Orsini worries what will come from the budget cuts that City Hall announced Thursday.
Every agency is going to be impacted.
A $5.5 million slash to the sanitation department means fewer litter baskets and cuts for cleanups of sidewalks and greenways. The public library will have to close certain branches on Sundays as of December. And as for schools, the education department says $120 million will be eliminated from pre-K and 3K programs, along with rollbacks to summer school.
If they cut up all these programs, what are the kids going to be? In the streets. That's where they're going to be.
The NYPD will feel it too. The cuts may eliminate the next 5 classes in the police academy, leaving the NYPD with fewer than 30,000 officers by next year, numbers the department has not seen since the 1990s. Even though tax revenue has outpaced projections, Mayor Adams says the city has to close a $7 billion budget gap in the next fiscal year. He blames these cuts on federal COVID aid ending and costs of the migrant crisis rising. The teachers union projects 43% of the school system will be hit with mid-year budget cuts. That's exacerbated by a record number of homeless students, many of whom are seeking asylum and learning English.
This is going to become a really ugly public fight. Our schools dealing with the asylum seekers are under a tremendous amount of stress and pressure because they're not getting a lot of support, and now they're going to get cuts on top of it.
City Councilman Justin Brannon chairs the Council Finance Committee. He says there will soon be oversight hearings to evaluate the budget plan.
I think some of these proposed cuts are really puzzling, and I think the onus now is on the council to put forward some alternative proposals.
On top of all this, City Hall says agencies should prepare for 2 more funding cuts in the next 6 months.
We need help. And them cutting everything off is going to be worse because we're not going to have nothing.
But the mayor says on the bright side, he's not raising taxes. In Astoria, Queens, Ali Bauman, CBS 2 News.
Now, according to reports, New York Mayor Eric Adams says that he has to cut the budget for city services across the board in order to deal with the overwhelming cost of the migrant crisis. And according to Eric Adams, because the cost of trying to feed, clothe, and house all of the migrants who have been coming into New York City since 2022, when Texas Governor Greg Abbott began busing migrants who entered the country illegally up to sanctuary cities like New York. These costs are so overwhelming that the city has to go out here and slash the budget for city services across the board by 5%. Now, this latest slashing of the budget is compounded by previous budget cuts that have been implemented to deal with the overall overwhelming cost of trying to feed, clothe, and house over 100,000 migrants who have been bussed into New York City, as Texas Governor Greg Abbott has been challenging New York City and New York State's sanctuary city law that provides sanctuary to all individuals who enter the country illegally and provide them a safe place to be so that they won't be deported by federal ICE agents. Now, Eric Adams, back in 2022, believed that he could go out here and be able to take care of all of these migrants. However, as his mouth was writing a check, it's clear that the city's ass couldn't cash the check that Eric Adams was writing. Now, you would think that Eric Adams, who already knew that the city was dealing with a fiscal deficit due to the 8 years of Bill de Blasio's wild spending, would understand that the city could not afford to take care of all of these migrants who Greg Abbott was busing into the city. However, that did not stop Eric Adams from going out here and trying to care for all of these migrants and trying to honor New York City and New York State's sanctuary city law. No, Eric Adams, in an effort to try to virtue signal to higher up politicians on the left like New York Governor Kathy Hochul and President Joe Biden, went out here and welcomed many migrants back in 2022 with open arms and a handshake as they got off buses, and proclaimed that the city would remain open for illegals back in 2021 in an effort again to virtue signal to those higher up politicians like Kathy Hochul and Joe Biden, and hope that by going out here and following in the footsteps of Bill de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo, this would open the door for a job for Eric Adams in the Biden administration's second term of office, or possibly lead to him getting an appointment by Kathy Hochul or an appointment to run for governor. And as the Biden of Brooklyn was bootlicking all of these higher up Blue Party politicians, he wasn't counting the cost of trying to care for all of these migrants. And as his mouth was out here writing checks that his ass couldn't cash, the cream of wheat man was out here trying to cook up a scheme to try to deal with the overwhelming cost of trying to feed, clothe, and house all of these migrants. And as he was looking to try to deal with trying to care for all of these migrants and got overwhelmed by just 30,000 migrants in America's largest city, he started to get frustrated because he started to see no help, or in the case of everything, anyone looking to fulfill the covert contract he hoped to make with the Biden administration as related to these migrants. Because the main reason why Eric Adams went out here and was eager to accept all of these migrants into the city, even though the city was running a fiscal deficit, was because he wanted to get the favor of Joe Biden and again hoped to get that job in Biden's second term cabinet. And he thought that by accepting these migrants, it would show him to be an extremely competent individual as related to following and towing the party line. However, that covert contract was never fulfilled because Joe Biden hadn't spoken to Eric Adams since 2022, and since he hadn't spoken to him in over a year, there was no agreement between the Biden administration and Eric Adams' administration to get federal funding to care for all of these migrants. And as the city began to try to burden the cost of caring for all of these migrants, New York City's shelter system quickly became overwhelmed, and the city's entire shelter system could not handle these individuals. Moreover, the city itself could not handle taking care of just 30,000 migrants by March of 2023, and that's when Eric Adams began calling out Joe Biden, but Joe Biden wasn't saying a word to him as related to this situation. Now, as this situation became more and more dire, Eric Adams started looking to find places to house migrants, and he went basically everywhere all across the city in any space he could put them, and even reopened the Roosevelt Hotel, which had wound up closing in 2020, and made it an intake center. And as he made it an intake center, what he did was start going down to the border, hoping to dissuade migrants from coming into New York City. However, that campaign was completely foolish because many of these migrants could not read or write in any language, and any flyers that they would give them to dissuade them to come, not to come to New York City, would not be heard because most of the migrants basically saw pictures of New York City on TV shows from the 90s and the 80s like Friends, Seinfeld, Sex and the City, and many other TV shows and many other movies, and dreamed of living in New York to achieve their American dream. And Eric Adams, as he saw himself becoming overwhelmed, started to look to do passive-aggressive tactics as related to trying to dissuade migrants, looking to first stop bringing buses to the Roosevelt Hotel and making the migrants walk to the hotel and find their way, to going out here and leaving migrants on the streets of New York, leaving them to create squalid conditions and trying to shame the Biden administration into allocating money to take care of all of the migrants. However, this blew up in Eric Adams' face as he proclaimed that the migrant crisis would destroy New York City over the summer. And as he proclaimed that the migrant crisis would destroy New York City, he implemented the first of budget cuts as related to the city and is now looking to implement more budget cuts, but these are going to impact the overall quality of life for New Yorkers because with these budget cuts, there will be a hiring freeze for teachers and police officers. And right now, we have many officers retiring and many teachers retiring, so that's going to lead to labor shortages in the schools and with the police department, who will see their numbers lower to the lowest numbers since the 1990s. We will have the smallest police force since the 1990s. We will go from the heights of the police force being at 50,000 in the mid-90s due to the Joe Biden crime bill, to the numbers of police officers being back to where they were when the city was a hellhole due to the crack epidemic. And this basically is going to impact the safety of New Yorkers, and it's also going to impact the education of New Yorkers who won't be able to get new teachers into schools, where we will start to see overcrowding. Moreover, we will start to see the city get dirty as sanitation isn't going to be able to do more pickups, and that's going to lead to this encroaching on Eric Adams' sole rat program and the rat czar, as these rats will have more garbage to furrow through. And we will also start to see New York City public libraries close on Sunday, and all of these fiscal costs are what Eric Adams claimed have to happen in order to find the $12 billion in order to take care of all of the migrants who came into New York City. Now, according to Eric Adams, he says that in order to maintain this budget, we need to cut the budget by 5% across the board. And what he's looking to do is take care of these migrants on the backs of New York taxpayers, because he couldn't get the money from the Biden administration. And because he couldn't get the money from the Biden administration to take care of these migrants, what he's looking to do is take care of them on the back of New York City taxpayers. And as he looks to take care of these migrants on the backs of New York City taxpayers, New York City's taxpayers are being told that they have to give up their quality of life, and they are being told this by the mayor, who said that migrants would destroy New York City. However, when I look at the big picture as related to this whole budget crisis, the person who is going to destroy New York City is Eric Adams, and it's all due to his incompetence. And while he'll say that the migrant crisis was the thing that would destroy New York City, no, I have to say the person destroying New York City is Eric Adams, due to his incompetence as related to being a fiscal manager and his complete incompetence as a leader overall. Now, Eric Adams, if he were a critical thinker, he would have understood that it's not the migrant crisis that would have destroyed New York City. No, it's his inept leadership that is destroying New York City, because any good leader would have understood how the law works. And you would think a police officer would understand how the law works as related to the three branches of government and the federal and state jurisdictions, because this whole migrant crisis didn't even need to happen, because if you understand the law, you would understand as a member of the executive branch that the city has no jurisdiction as related to affairs of the federal government. And these migrants who entered the country illegally are not under the jurisdiction of the city. And when Greg Abbott decided to bus those individuals up to New York City, he basically was violating federal law as related to the handling of individuals who enter the country illegally. And that's where the mayor, if he were smart as related to law, would have said that the sanctuary city law in and of itself was unconstitutional, because the sanctuary city law is one that's saying that you're going to have the city and the state supersede federal law as related to individuals, because individuals who enter the country illegally are, one, trespassers, and two, since they have entered the country illegally, they are under federal jurisdiction, and that means that those individuals are under the jurisdiction of ICE, and those individuals need to be handled by ICE, not by states or cities. So that would be the reasoning for turning the buses back, because these individuals are under the jurisdiction of ICE, and that would be the main reason for turning those buses back. But Eric Adams is not a critical thinker. No, he's a clout-chasing cream-o-wheat man, and this clout-chasing cream-o-wheat man basically went out here and tried to virtue signal to show that New York City was going to be better than Donald Trump, the racist that they say he is. However, what ironically they did was prove Donald Trump right about his point about dealing with individuals who enter the country illegally. And it proves his point because he's showing that cities and states can't handle taking care of all of these individuals. And since they can't take care of all of these individuals, this is where the federal government has to step in. And unfortunately, the federal government hasn't stepped in as related to the Biden administration, because the Biden administration knows how difficult it would have been after the 2022 election to get any sort of funding to take care of people who entered the country illegally. Because with a red Congress and a blue Senate, it would be nigh impossible to get the funding that Eric Adams has been begging Joe Biden for, and any critical thinker would have saw that coming as related to 2021, with Biden's already declining approval ratings and the state of the city being in a bad place fiscally, and they wouldn't have gone out here and made a braggadocious claim like Eric Adams did as related to saying that the city could handle all of these migrants. Moreover, they wouldn't be seen on video shaking hands with migrants. And as Eric Adams shakes hands with migrants, he's basically thrown up a middle finger at most of the New Yorkers who voted for him in the 2021 election, because he's telling New Yorkers that it's their responsibility to go out here and live in a dirtier, less safe city that is already dealing with rampant crime, and telling New Yorkers that they basically have to deal with this situation, a situation that was created by his incompetence, because he was the one who went out here and bragged about being able to take care of these migrants, knowing full well that he had a fiscal deficit from the de Blasio administration that he inherited, and further exacerbated this by having an 11-month jab mandate that damaged the city's ability to generate revenue, because 1 million New Yorkers who were unvaccinated were not allowed to work. So Eric Adams basically has created a fiscal situation that is turning into a fiscal crisis, And he wants to go out here and blame people like Greg Abbott. He wants to blame Joe Biden. But at the end of the day, he is the head of the executive branch who made all of these decisions and wants to say that the migrant crisis is the thing that will destroy New York City. But when I look at Eric Adams, it's his incompetent mismanagement of the city's fiscal resources are the thing that's destroying New York City, and his bad decisions are the thing that are destroying New York City and destroying New York City's quality of life, taking us back to the dark days from the 1970s and all the way up to the early 90s, when New York City was a hellhole due to the first fiscal crisis, and later on the crack epidemic of the late 1980s, and that's all due to his incompetence as a leader, because while he can talk a good game, he does not show results. And in between this and the FBI investigation as related to the monies, as related to the straw donors and the Turkish consulate, Eric Adams is looking like the worst mayor in New York City history, surpassing Ed Koch, surpassing David Dinkins, surpassing Bill de Blasio. And all what we're seeing from the cream of wheat man is that he looks to cook up schemes and talk jive. And even though he talks jive, when you look at his results, you don't see how he's improving the quality of life for New Yorkers. No, outside of him being a black mayor, he doesn't really have anything to offer. And what he's done is actually make it harder for the next black politician who hopes to go out here and run for office, because in between him and David Dinkins, he's sending a message that black politicians are just completely incompetent. But Eric Adams was incompetent from minute one. I even say, even when he was the Brooklyn Borough president, he was incompetent, because when I look at the way he handled the whole thing with the Turkish consulate, just complete incompetence. And the way he was doing campaign finance, again, complete incompetence, a precursor to the incompetence we see right now. And while he again talks about how the migrant crisis is going to destroy New York City, I would have to say he was the one with the wrecking ball, and he was the one with the wrecking ball because he wanted to clout chase to show how he wasn't Donald Trump. But in his efforts, ironically, to show that he wasn't Donald Trump, he has shown everyone that he is less competent than Donald Trump. Because yes, you will say Donald Trump is a racist, but the whole thing is this guy basically threw black people under the bus with his vaccine mandate, and he also went out here and didn't look out to help black people as he was out here bootlicking the Turkish consulate. The Biden of Brooklyn has turned into a incompetent bootlick who shows that he, while for all of his flash, he has none of the substance of leadership, and he has none of the ability to know how to think critically or understand the subtle politics transpiring around him, because anybody who understood the subtle politics transpiring around them knew that in 2022 you would have had a Republican majority in the House, and that majority in the House would have ensured that you would have never got any funding to take care of individuals who entered the country illegally. And with that majority, you are never going to get any federal funding, because funding that has to go through Congress has to go through a lot of bureaucracy, and this can take years. So Eric Adams basically shows me that while he talks about how the migrant crisis is going to destroy New York City, no, it's Eric Adams who's destroying New York City, and New York City voters basically deserve it, because New York City voters, they want to go out here and spite Donald Trump. They get in their feelings about Donald Trump, not understanding the consequences of voting is the candidates that you pick. And this is where the city basically has egg on its face for its ranked choice voting system, which they implemented to try to be so-called fair. But the ranked choice voting system gave us one of the worst candidates, and it just needs to be scrapped before the 2025 election, because I don't know what's going to be worse in 2025. Are we going to have stupid New Yorkers who continue to vote for Eric Adams and bring him back for a second term to further implode the city, to try to preserve so-called democracy to spite Donald Trump based on feelings? Or are we going to have critical thinking New Yorkers who are going to realize that this man was never fit for office, and realize that you need to get a competent fiscal manager who can look at the big picture of the city and look at the big picture of the city to think about the consequences of actions as related to impacting the quality of life of New Yorkers, because a dirtier, less safe city that has no hotels for travel and tourism and has the highest taxes and the lowest pay is not going to be a place that incentivizes people to come to New York. Moreover, with all of the crime, it's not going to incentivize businesses to invest in building businesses in New York and bringing jobs to New York. No, what Eric Adams has done basically in less than half of his term is start to run the city straight into the ground, the same way David Dinkins and Ed Koch and Abe Beame ran New York City into the ground, showing me that when you put blue party people in leadership positions, they are so busy looking to follow behind people to clout chase that they don't lead anything or don't have any vision for the city. And this whole budget cut, again, this is 5% on top of another 5%, and it's supposed to be 15%. And taxpayers are not getting what they paid for with Eric Adams in a competent fiscal manager of the executive branch. We are either getting a guy who may possibly be indicted and again might possibly be voted out of office if New Yorkers are smart at all, because it's clear to me that Eric Adams is not the mayor that New York City needs. He's the mayor that New York City deserves, because when you vote on your feelings, what happens is you get consequences for your actions. And when you vote to try to spite Donald Trump, you get a New York City that is someplace worse than any place in the world. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my black sorority novel, The Thetas, or my black vampire novel, Eternal Night, or some of my men's issues books like Stop Simpin', The Man Crisis, The Woman Crisis, and Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, you can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find those books at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to see me make more videos about the migrant crisis, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback. Those who refuse the gift of eternal life are condemned to wander in the darkness of eternal night. Get your copy of Eternal Night at online booksellers today.
Now available on Lulu. John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at lulu.com today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.